Today, we're exploring a creative, easy, reversible project that uses garter stitch. In this video, I'll show you all the skills you need for this project. All you need is some yarn and a long circular needle and a crochet hook for the cast on. Then I'll summarize how to make the project right from cast on all the way to cast off. I'll also give you some other ideas for projects that use these knitting skills. If you're an experienced knitter and want to jump straight to the project summary, here's the timestamp. Reversible stitches are great because, of course, they look great on both sides. They also have the advantage that they don't curl, which is annoying, and they have a great texture and structure. For this project, we're using garter stitch, which is the most basic knitting stitch of all, and it's also reversible. It's easy to work and extremely versatile, so it's a great way to get better at knitting, gain new skills, and also be creative. Let's start with the cast on. My favorite cast on is the crochet cast on. It's easy and it looks nice. You start with a short tail and it's a bit stretchy, so it works for most projects. I'll cast on 18 stitches. First, make a slip knot, making sure it's the working yarn that tightens the loop. Slip the crochet hook through the loop. Lay the needle over the working yarn, parallel to the crochet hook. Now wrap the yarn around both needles over the front and to the back. Pull through a loop on the crochet hook, always pulling the working yarn in the same way. If you slip off, you can reset by making sure that the yarn is behind both needles. You may need to slide the yarn between the ends of the needles. Don't pull it too tight or it will be hard to knit into. Try to be consistent. Do this 17 times in total. The last stitch is the loop on the crochet hook with the yarn in the back. Garter stitch worked flat is made using the knit stitch on both sides of the fabric. It's usually written as all rows knit across. Let's knit a few rows. I'm a continental knitter and I hold my yarn like this. The simpler the better. If you're new to knitting, try to set up your yarn the same way each time until you get used to it. Make sure the yarn is at the back. Right needle into the old stitch from the left, under the left needle. Yarn around the needle clockwise. Pull the new stitch through the old stitch. Push the needle through the new stitch. Slide the right needle to the right to drop the old stitch off the left needle. Let's do that again. In from the left, yarn around clockwise, pull the new stitch through, push through the new stitch, pull the old stitch off. Notice the V on the right needle and the yarn coming from the back over the needle to the front. Advance the stitches on the left needle so they don't pull. Use the right needle as a gauge when you pull the slack in the working yarn so you get even stitches. Let's keep knitting to the end of the row. Turn the work, making sure the working yarn doesn't wrap around the needle, and knit back. Turn the work again. The working yarn is on the right now. Let's look at what we've knit so far and compare it to a diagram. Here you can see the flat knit stitches on the first row. When you work knit stitches on the other side of the fabric, they look like purls on this side, since purls are the opposite of knits. Here you see the purl bumps on the top row right under the needle. This is the last row that we knit on the other side. By convention, the first knit row is the bottom row, worked from right to left. In the diagram, you can see the purl-looking row, which was made with knit stitches on the other side. In this way, one row has knit-looking stitches, and the next row has purl-looking stitches when you look at them from the same side. Since both sides and all stitches are worked the same, it's a one stitch, one row repeat. Let's knit a few more rows. Feel free to pause the video. Your knitting is looking good. The next thing we'll practice is purling. Rather than pulling the yarn from the back to the front to make a stitch, purling is the opposite. We're pushing the yarn from the front to the back. yarn around the needle so that stitches form in the same orientation as the knit stitches. First, move the yarn to the front. Insert the needle on the right side in front of the left-hand needle. Wrap the yarn around the needle clockwise. I find it helpful to hold the yarn with my finger down the shaft of the right-hand needle so it doesn't slip off. Then push the end toward the back and push the needle through the new stitch. Slide the right needle to the right to drop the old stitch off the left needle. Let's do that again. Yarn in front, needle in purlwise, yarn around the needle, hold the yarn down, push the yarn through the old stitch, push the needle through, drop the old stitch off the left needle. Notice the purl bump on the right needle. You know you've done it right if the yarn comes from the back over the needle. Let's purl to the end of the row and then turn the work. Before we continue, let's take a quick look at what we have so far. The first thing you'll notice is that on this side of the work, the purl looks like a knit. Now we have 2 rows of knit-looking stitches, one made with knits and one made with purls. Let's purl a few more rows. Feel free to pause the video. Notice how the stitch pattern using knits each row looks the same as the stitch pattern using purls each row, except for at the transition from knit to purl stitch. Now let's look at garter stitch with circular knitting. Hang in there if you've never done this before. It's a great introduction, and I'll actually make it a bit easier to start by continuing with the section of flat knitting that we just made, instead of starting with a new cast on. Normally in flat knitting, when you get to the end of the work, you turn the work and start knitting in the opposite direction. So instead, we'll now connect to the other end of the fabric and go around. I like magic loop. You can also use a running loop or 4 or 5 double-pointed needles. To make sure the fabric is connected in a circle, the working yarn needs to be on the back needle, which will become the right needle. So make sure to bend the fabric in this direction and not in the other direction. To set up for a magic loop, find the cord in the middle of the fabric and pull it out. Now push the needles through the stitches until the needles are parallel, with the working yarn attached to the back needle. I like to twist the needle so the extra cord makes a curve down. Now check that the working yarn is coming straight up from the back needle and not behind. Now we're ready, so let's knit around. I'll pull out the back needle and the front or left needle is ready to go. Let's knit a stitch, just like before. After you make the first stitch, make sure at the join to pull the working yarn so there's no loose yarn. Now you can knit across just like before. At the midpoint, turn the work, reset the front needle and the cord, check the working yarn, and we're ready to pull the back needle and continue the round. Continue knitting for a few more rounds. Feel free to pause the video. Since we're working on the same side of the fabric for all the rounds, all we can see are knit-looking stitches. Let's practice purling in the round. It's the same as before. Continue purling for a few rounds. Feel free to pause the video. In order to make the fabric look like flat garter stitch, we need to alternate a knit row with a purl row. You know what round you're on by checking for the purl bumps just below the needle. Garter stitch in the round is a 1 stitch, 2 round repeat. The last thing we need to learn is to change back to knitting flat. This is very similar to what we've done so far. Given that I like working the knit stitch more than the purl stitch, it's important to end on a knit round so that I can knit back on the other side to stay in garter stitch pattern. So at the end of the knit round, rather than continuing straight, knit back. I use a modified magic loop for a few rows until there's enough give to knit all the stitches After a few rows, it looks like this. Isn't that awesome? So let's look at a creative project that we can make with the garter stitch knit flat and in the round. I call this my candy wrapper scarflet because the structure makes me think of a twisted candy wrapper. Let's go through it from cast on to cast off. You can use whatever yarn and needle size you want. The smaller the needles relative to the yarn, the tighter the knitting and the better the pockets stand open. I've used an acrylic Aran weight yarn or medium weight number 4 and a 4.5mm or size 7 needle for the scarf. I'm using something slightly larger for this video. Whatever you like the look of is perfect. For the cast on, you can use however many stitches you want. The fewer the stitches across, the fewer rows you need for the scarf to lie flat between the pockets. You can use any cast on you like, it doesn't need to be stretchy. I'm casting on 18 stitches using a crochet cast on. Knit a section flat. You can decide how many rows to work as you knit if you like. If it's too short, then the pocket won't sit open at the bottom. When I made this scarf, I knit until I got a bit bored of garter, and then I decided to change it up a bit. It was about 36 rows. Now make the running change to knitting in the round, like we just learned. You can make this section as long as you like. I found if it's too short, it pulls apart a bit and doesn't look nice. Again, you can work this out as you knit if you like. I knit 6 rounds for my project, starting with the purl round and alternating with knit rounds to stay in pattern. Once your circular section is as long as you like, make a running change back to flat knitting. I prefer to change after a knit round so I can knit back. Use a modified magic loop until the fabric can lie flat again. Knit a section flat. This section can be about the same as the first section. You can work it out as you knit. I knit about 36 rows. Now make another running change back to circular knitting, this time making sure that the fabric is connected in the other direction. The key is for the last row to end on the left of the opening of the previous pocket. Now, when you set up for magic loop, the pocket opens on the other side. Continue in this way, alternating knitting flat and in the round, making sure to connect the round sections in the opposite way of the one before.
For the cast off, you can use any cast off you like. It doesn't have to be particularly stretchy. I'm using a very simple cast off that works well for garter stitch. Knit the first stitch, knit the second stitch, slip the first stitch over the second stitch on the right needle. Continue in this way until you have 2 stitches left on the left needle. I like to work them together to make a nice corner. This cast off matches nicely with the crochet cast on. Lastly, cut the working yarn leaving a tail and work in the ends. You can do this with the crochet hook or with a large-eyed needle.
You can choose to make the sections the same length or different lengths, and you can choose the final length of your project. For the candy wrapper scarflet, I made the sections the same length and just long enough for the pockets to stand open without a big section of flat knitting in between. Awesome! Let me know how it goes in the comments. Another easy project you can make with this technique is a cowl that has 1 or 2 splits. You can make it using garter stitch or any reversible knitting pattern that you like. Here's one I made with moss stitch. In my video on moss stitch, I showed how an odd number of stitches makes moss a 1-row repeat and seamless in the round. The next video will be an explanation of this project, including how to make a swatch. So pick up your knitting and create something awesome. I'll do my best to respond to comments, and I'd love to hear about your favorite reversible knitting project. Also feel free to subscribe to my channel for more awesome reversible knitting. For those of you still here, the last few years I've been working hard to find simple ways to feel better, what I call my daily well-being practices. This is not medical advice, I'm just sharing what works for me. Today's well-being practice is about using small successes to lead to bigger action. If I'm really not feeling motivated, I can often convince myself to do just 5 minutes. 5 minutes of walking, 5 minutes of cleaning, 5 minutes of decluttering. Then I can celebrate that I got something done. This small accomplishment and celebration produces a dopamine rush that leads to motivation for more action, and it becomes a positive upward spiral. I'm never going to be spontaneously motivated to clean a toilet. But if I clean the sink or the mirror first, then it's a bit easier. There are lots of videos about motivation. They are easy to find. Have a great day.